Today is it's a really important day for us. Nityananda Trayodasi. Trayodasi is the 13th day of the waning and waxing moon, so we're in a day 13 of a 15-day cycle. The moon gets bigger for 15 days, then it gets smaller for 15 days, and so Ekadasi is the 11th day, Trayodasi is the 13th day. On our holidays, they tell you the day of the week it occurs, not the week, but the day of the fortnight it occurs during. And so that's, you had to wait till Saptami is the 7th day, and then 6 days later, Nityananda Trayodasi, and yesterday was Vrahadvadasi, the 12th day, and before that was Bhayami Ekadasi, the 11th day. So you can just, that last word that's attached, it tells you what's going on. And then there's Avirbhav, appearance day, and Tirobhav, disappearance day. So you can figure out what's going on. Is it an appearance day? Is it a disappearance day? Is it which day of the week, which day of the fortnight did it happen during, etc., etc. I guess we can just Nityananda's he's kind of half of the Hare Krishna movement. And so to understand who we are, and it's like, I don't know how it works, but I know with GPS technology, they're shooting some kind of lasers down from satellites, and they're triangulating your position, and maybe there's multiple points of, I don't know how many points they need to get to figure out where you're at. Before I joined the Hare Krishna movement, I did some environmental, social justice activism. And there's a nuclear testing facility out in Nevada, and we went out there to protest it. This is in the late 80s. And it was a thing where it's a government base, and so then thousands of people gathered, and then they would walk into the base. And you walk into the base, and the police would take you away. So it was, if you wanted to make an activist scene, then you would walk into the base 1 foot, and then the police would be waiting there for you, and then they would handcuff you and take you to the police station. Does that make sense? So there was like a do not cross line, and then some hippie crossed it, and then they arrested him, and it became a line of hippies who would cross it, and then it was almost like you were waiting to get into a movie or something like that, or into a ride at a amusement park. And so there was an orderly line of hippies, hundreds of them, that were getting arrested, thousands of them participating, and then there were police officers. It was like a unstated agreement between the protesters and the police. So just me being me, I jumped the fence 50 yards away from where people were going through and walking through and getting arrested. I jumped the fence and I ran once I got in the military base. So they had to chase me. And that was a big deal. I got cheers from the thousands of people who were in attendance. And then a few more people jumped the fence, but then they were quickly subdued. They were quickly subdued. And then, but I was quick. I was exercising a lot at that point. I had cardio for days. And so I just outran them, and then they had to go get vehicles. And so then they got military vehicles, because it was an army base. And so they had a bunch of kind of Humvee type things. And I evaded them for about an hour. And one of the things I would do is I would just duck down because there was tall desert brush, and then I would crawl along the ground for a while and then pop up somewhere else and then run. And then it was like a game of, like a whack-a-mole game, but they weren't able to hit me. They weren't able to get me. Anyway, eventually they caught me. Eventually they surrounded me and kind of crushed me in. And I said, okay, I didn't want to get tackled. And so I gave up. And they arrested me and they let me go. So it was nothing. They didn't fingerprint me or anything like that. They let me go. And I was the belle of the ball as I was getting taken away. Everybody was cheering me and hurrahing me. And I wondered what it was that allowed them to catch me, and one of the guys, a sergeant or whatever, he said, I'm a hunter. And so I know how to track animals that duck down. I know how to pinpoint an area, and I know they can only move so far, and was able to hone in on your position, and we were talking with radios, and I was telling everybody where to go so that you had no escape. And that's how we were able to eventually. And there was some kind of mutual respect. There was some kind of mutual respect that was there. I put up a good fight, and they did their job well, and so there was kind of like a real, recognized as real moment between me and the sergeant. And I don't know if other people got fingerprinted or spent the night in jail, but they let me go. And they were the police and the military were quite respectful towards me. Instead of putting my hands behind my back like they were doing a lot of people, they put my hands in front of my back so it wouldn't be quite so uncomfortable for me. And they let me go and nicely placed me in the vehicle and let me out. So that was like a primitive form of GPS, of triangulating my position. And I think satellite, global positioning technology, GPS, what is it? Global positioning systems, I guess is what it is. Global positioning satellite, GPS technology. I'm assuming they have several points and they're able to map it out, triangulate it. I know cell phones use similar technology. And so that was totally tangential. It had no value to the class whatsoever. It was just a cool story I thought of, and I thought I would mention it. But if I was forced to cram it into the class and make it make sense, there are several points, and I think you need to be able to almost memorize several points. If you can memorize these several points, then you know what it is to be a Hare Krishna, and one of those several points is Nityananda Prabhu. That's number one. So Radha Krishna are there, and then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as his own entity is there, and then Gaur Nitai. I think probably that would be enough for you to get the basics of what it means to be a devotee. And then within that universe, there's a few points you need to understand in order to know who Nityananda Prabhu is. And so I thought we would just go over that a little bit. Several prominent features of Nityananda, several different ways in which we view Nityananda, and how, if you have all those ways of viewing Nityananda, then you've triangulated his position within our movement, and then you have understood him, and then you're now a Gaudiya Vaishnava, and you're part of Nityananda's extended family. Does that make sense? All right, so first off, Nityananda was a devotee who walked the planet 5 centuries ago. Was born and brought up in Ekachakra, and was a constant companion of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And many of our prominent literary figures were his followers. So the Chaitanya Bhagavat was written by Vrindavan Das Thakur. Vrindavan Das Thakur was Nityananda's disciple. It's not the first biography of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Murari Gupta wrote before him. But was by far the most well-known of the early biographies of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that told his life story. And it's consistently referred to in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. The Chaitanya Charitamrita is it's a much more heavy theological text. There's a lot more philosophy in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Actually, most of the books of the Goswamis are located in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, our big book, one of the big books of the Hare Krishna movement. It's got half a dozen or more synopsises of half a dozen or more of our core Sanskrit texts in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, so that really, by reading the Chaitanya Charitamrita, you get a Bengali version of all the writings of the Goswamis, at least the most important writings: Bhakti-rasamrita Sindhu, Brihad Bhagavatamrita, Satsandarbhas, Lalita and Vidagdha Madhava, and the list goes on. You get a real education in the basics of our theology. And we have a serious theology. Our theologians spent a century, and they were major pundits, super learned. And that's all collected in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. You don't find that in Chaitanya Bhagavat. The Chaitanya Bhagavat just tells a story of Mahaprabhu's life. And Nityananda, he's a huge figure. But Nityananda, Krishna Kaviraj, the author of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, was also a disciple of Nityananda Prabhu. So you got two. You have the two of the most important books in our tradition: the Chaitanya Bhagavat and the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And both those books were written by followers of Nityananda. And they went big. They went really big. Said, if you accept Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and you don't accept Nityananda, you're like someone who cuts the head off a chicken and thinks you're still going to get eggs. Ard kukuti nyaya, half-hen logic. You're as stupid as somebody who cuts the head off a chicken and thinks they're still going to get eggs. That's how foolish you are if you accept Chaitanya Mahaprabhu but reject Nityananda Prabhu. That's a big claim. So they're saying it's a package deal. Actually, the famous opening verse of the Chaitanya Bhagavat, Ajana Lambita Bujo, it's all written in the dual case that it's about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu. It's about both of them. The first verse glorifies both of them. So from page 1, verse 1, all the way through the text, there's this constant theme. there's a bunch of verses about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that are given, and then the next, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and the next thing is a bunch of verses about Nityananda Prabhu. No less than 5 verses about Nityananda Prabhu. 7 about Mahaprabhu. I think altogether, if you count them all up, it's 7. Maybe not. Maybe it's 5 about Mahaprabhu. But then there's 5 verses about Nityananda. 6 about Mahaprabhu, thank you. 5 verses about Nityananda, 2 about Advaita, and then 1 about the Gurus. 14 verses total. And so, 6 about Mahaprabhu, 5 about Nityananda. He's a big piece of the puzzle. So first things first, Nityananda Prabhu was an ecstatic Vaishnava who made thousands of disciples, has followers currently that number in the millions, has an entire Vangsha or a lineage that descends from him, which make up most of the traditional Gaudiya Vaishnavas in Bengal. They migrated to Braj, and then you'll meet, all the Vaishnavas in Braj, the traditional Vaishnavas in Braj who settled in Vrindavan and lived there at Radhakund and other places. Almost all of them are in the disciplic succession of Nityananda Prabhu. Srila Prabhupada was born in that lineage. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was initiated in that lineage. Where it's the major shaka, the major branch of the Chaitanya tree. So he was a Vaishnava, and he was an unusual Vaishnava. He was unusual. How is he unusual? Well, he preached to low-class people. It was one thing. It was a pretty stratified society early on that Mahaprabhu appeared in. Brahmanas were generally self-sequestered from the rest of society. And Nityananda was an Oja. His father was the equivalent of a medicine man, a village medicine man, or a shaman. Almost like a witch doctor, tribal medicine man. But also there's a thing that he was also a Brahmin. So it's like you get that, somehow doctors sort of occupy a gray area within traditional Vedic society where they're half Brahmins and half something else. And so, but I mean, Nityananda was from the, let's say the rural area of Gauda Desh. And his father was a Hadai Pandit, was a Brahmin, but also was a Hadai Oja. He also seemed to be in the role of what would be considered to be a medicine man, a shaman. And somehow Nityananda was, he was Avadut Shiromani, the crest jewels of the wild zealots, the unconventional, ecstatic, raptured, spiritual savants. When you look at Vedic literatures, you find there's a group of people, Avaduts or Kaishans, that wouldn't keep their hair properly. They'd let their hair dread. Sometimes they'd walk naked. And they did not fit within the Vedic schema. Their spiritual, exalted status left them in a half-maddened state. Nityananda is oftentimes considered to be one of them. And part of that was that he preached to women. He preached to the lower rungs of society. And he made Gaudiya Vaishnavism accessible to everybody. And this feature of our bhakti movement, the bhakti movement within a religion, inevitably ends up breaking down caste distinctions, becomes very egalitarian, and makes the price of your status within the group based on your actual spiritual advancement versus money or prestige or a good education, a good family. it allows, it resets the metric of how you judge people's worth. And you judge people's worth based on their love for Krishna and their purity and their selflessness, which doesn't exactly equate to their bank balance or their knowledge or their breeding. Bhakti does this. It's always done this. It's unusual. You find this in any bhakti movement. You find sannyasis offering their obeisance to grihastas in South India because the grihasta followers of Ramanujacharya had more love for Krishna than the big sannyasis did. There's stories about this. And so, I use that in my story time, otherwise I'd tell you guys a story about it. But bhakti has this wildness to it. That we don't care where you've been or what you've done. It doesn't actually matter. It all washes off. No one's soul is infected. Krishna loves everybody. Everybody's got a future. Everybody has a shot. And so, Nityananda, more than anybody else, embodied that Gaudiya Vaishnava ideal. And if you go and you look at census data in Bengal, or if you look at modern day Bengali society, you will find that Vaishnavas have been gradually, over the centuries, rehabilitating their caste status. The word das or dasyu is an old Vedic term, and it refers to the indentured servants that were defeated by the Aryans and were put into, not slavery, but some kind of a bonded state, some kind of an indentured servant status. They were the defeated military. And so the word dasyus were I think what arguably could be seen as the indigenous inhabitants of India when it was invaded by the Aryans who took over on horseback, who then got their karma millennia later when the Muslims rode into Bengal, for example, on horseback and completely devastated the area. Bengal is part of this Gangetic plain that was a major area. And if you look at Bengali, it's about 70% Sanskrit. It makes it really easy to understand what Bengali is saying if you studied Sanskrit, because it has much more in common with Sanskrit than Hindi. Hindi is about the opposite. Hindi's about 30% Sanskrit, 70% Urdu. Bengali is reversed. It's about 70% Sanskrit, 30% other stuff. And it's far away from the Sultanate in Delhi or, the Middle East. And so it was the last sort of stretch of the Islamic Empire. And although it was conquered by the Muslims, it retained a lot of its original character. Anyway, the word das is a word that's associated with shudras, with a class of people who are servants, maids, and such. And they're low-class terms in Hindi. Das, dasi. Sometimes das even has a racy connotation to it. A girl who's a maidservant but also becomes like a kept woman. And then the owner of the house can have his way with her. This connotation is there with the term dasi. Are you aware of this, Rupanimaji? You didn't know this? You aware of this? Pramanjan, you aware of this? Yeah. How about you, Radheshwari? You know this from South, right? But it's unusual because in Bengal, the word das has become like a rehabilitated term, because over the centuries, since Mahaprabhu's time, and it's noted by the British, people became Vaishnavas and their caste situation improved because through their Vaishnavism they began to be viewed by society as priests, as brahmanas, as respectable people. The fact that we give people the name Das affixed to their name when they're initiated is really heavy, because it means we're saying we are servants, we are slaves, we are in perpetual servitude. to Krishna. Krishna Das, Govinda Das. These are traditional Vaishnava names because Vaishnavas give up their caring so much about caste and they voluntarily accept their servitude, even their slavery to the divine, through love, through bhakti. And so these terms, which previously had a bad connotation, now have a positive connotation. Just like the word kam, which means desire or lust, is used within our literature to describe the gopis and their love for Krishna. Lobh, which means greed, it's one of the nark dvars, the gates to hell, becomes rehabilitated by our tradition, and it's used as the price for Krishna prema, is intense eagerness to have it. You have to be greedy for Krishna. You have to be lusty for Krishna. We take all these traditionally negative terms, which their primary meaning is negative, and then we co-opt them and we rehabilitate them. Das does that as well. But what's amazing is the Gaudiya movement had such a massive effect. The Bhakti movement in Bengal had such a massive effect on Bengal that when you look at the census data, you see the British writing about these rehabilitated castes of Gaudiyas and their names Das, who had uplifted themselves within society because society in general viewed them as being special and exempt from the regular caste distinctions based on their Vaishnavism. Did you guys get that? Actually, Hasidic Jews occupy really in many ways the same place within the Hasidim, within Orthodox Judaism, who generally look down upon conservative and Reform Jews in a variety of ways. But the Hasidim, followers of this ecstatic 18th century, really Jewish bhakti cult, following the Baal Shem Tov. And I think what's modern day Hungary, I think, is like where it took place. I could be off by a country. All those European countries are too closely put together. They're also respected by Orthodox Jews because they practice so strictly. No one challenges them or their heritage or their pedigree because they're just so darn strict that everybody gives them respect. Nityananda was the fountainhead of that movement, which was so powerful that it even shows up in the British census data. He preached to women, he preached to Shudras, he made them disciples, he made them part of our Vaishnava clan, and they became exalted people within our tradition. And how crazy did he get? He used to go out preaching with Haridas Thakur, a reformed Muslim. That's insane. That's just, absolutely insane. They even broke down that caste barrier. And they would be chased or assaulted, and they would show up at people's doorstep and say, Bhaja Krishna, Bolo Krishna, Kodo Krishna, Shikha, Krishna Mata, Krishna Pitta, Krishna Dhana Pran. Chant Krishna's name, worship Krishna, follow his instructions. Krishna is your mother and your father and the wealth of your life. They would just, in a really simple way, present the teachings of Vaishnavism to people on the street, like mendicants, like soapbox street preachers. Only they acquired millions of followers over hundreds of years, and we're really the modern day international branch of that crazy, wild, ecstatic movement that Nityananda Prabhu started. So who was he? He was a great Vaishnava who was the fountainhead of the Hare Krishna movement of engaging everybody in Krishna service and not making any distinctions. India is so caste conscious. If you look at the Indian laws, they are so much more aggressive than U.S. affirmative action laws. India has a system of reservations, which is affirmative action for them. And their first Supreme Court justice was a Shudra, an untouchable. And due to him, Ambedkar, they didn't make Sanskrit their national language. It was a big movement to make Sanskrit the lingua franca of India, but Ambedkar blocked it because he hated the Vedas. Did you know that? Fun fact. And India had a female prime minister. I think it was in the late 60s. Indira Gandhi? Late 60s? Early 70s? 1970 itself? In the 70s, in the early 70s. So they've been doing affirmative action forever. They had several Muslim prime ministers, even though the Muslims represent only 10% of the Indian population. They have seats within the lower houses of parliament reserved for scheduled castes and tribes. Universities have been doing affirmative action there where there's quotas for brahmanas, and so if you're from a lower caste you can get in no problem. If you're from Brahmin caste you probably can't get into schools sometimes because there's such stiff competition. But they've got all this stuff figured out, and this goes back to the 40s when Jim Crow was still in full effect in the US. Despite that, they can't get rid of the caste system because there's various benefits to being a member of a caste. You have certain guaranteed employment, and you have certain rights that have been written into village law forever, and it's hard to get rid of it. But Bhakti did it. Bhakti did what, practically speaking, even modern day laws have not been able to do over 80 years in India. It broke down the caste system. At the time, things were much more stratified than they are now. Nityananda Prabhu was at the fountainhead of that. And that is the only reason we're all here, because somebody thought Krishna's love deserved to embrace the world, and everybody could love Krishna, and there were no distinctions. And Prabhupada, frankly, was admitting when he was on a boat in Boston Harbor, and I think like maybe on September 13th or something like that, he wrote a poem and he said, how am I going to help these people? There's so much in the mode of tamaguna. They're so dark. Not dark-skinned, but dark-minded. And they're so blinded. How am I going to help these people? But on his faith and his mission, and Nityananda Prabhu, and if you look at Hare Krishna temples, Nityananda Prabhu is everywhere. Gaur Nitai deities are not super common amongst Gaudiyas. A lot of times we have a single deity of Mahaprabhu, Radha Krishna, even sometimes Gaur Gadadhar. But Prabhupada was like a really strict Gaur Nitai in every temple. Even we have it. We have the small deities of Gaur Nitai. Big deities also, but the small ones are just Gaur Nitai. Prabhupada considered this to be so important. So Nityananda was this fountainhead Vaishnava, breaker down of caste distinctions, rehabilitated the entire society of Bengal over the last 5 centuries, and even got noticed by the British. This bhakti movement, this bhakti, and, Muslims get preached to. Everybody gets preached to. No one's outside of Krishna's warm embrace. But he wasn't just a Vaishnava. He was also Krishna himself appearing in this world in his counter form. Krishna's counter form is Balaram. Really, when you look at the Panchatattva, you've got Radharani on one side, Gadadhar, and Balaram on the other side. And so Krishna doesn't appear solo. He appears with his counter form, or his moiety, his other half. And his other half on one side is Balaram, who, for all intents and purposes, is Krishna himself. So we don't just think Nityananda was a Vaishnava, we also think he was an incarnation of Krishna. And when we say incarnation, we don't mean incarnation in the way it's normally spoken about. You're, God conscious or self-realized. We don't mean it like that. We mean the Supreme Lord, the creator of the universe, walked this planet by his omnipotent and, omnibenevolent nature. Krishna descended in this world, and through his omnipotence, even without giving up his spiritual form, became visible to us. Really, he gave us divine eyes and did things in this world which were miraculous, which were designed to change the course of human history. He injected himself within matter out of his omnibenevolence to uplift the world. And Nityananda Prabhu is that Supreme Lord, who's Balaram, who inspires all of our gurus, who our gurus become his emissaries or ambassadors, or his practical manifestation in this world. Our lineage reaches out to people. Nityananda reaches out to people through our chain of gurus to make his mercy available to successive generations. So he's a Vaishnava and he's Krishna. And when I say Krishna, I mean Balaram. There's just not enough time to get into a whole thing on that, but he's an avatar. He's Kripa avatar. He's an incarnation of mercy who liberates everybody. I think these two things about Nityananda Prabhu, if you understand these two things, you've understood Nityananda. And then, Balaram is usually associated with cowherd boys, but then, conjugal love, romantic love between Radha and Krishna is our thing. It's what we're into. We're into dancing with Krishna, serving Krishna intimately. And so Nityananda is also an emissary for that through his consort, through Janavamata, who herself is an incarnation of Ananga Manjari. Which really means Nityananda is linked to Ananga Manjari, which really means Nityananda becomes linked to conjugal love, which is important for Gaudiyas who largely follow in the footsteps of the Manjaris. And so sometimes when you look at these personalities, if you really want to understand them, you have to look at them and their consort, because their consort is half the revelation. Their spouse is half the revelation. So you got Nityananda as a Vaishnav, changing the face of the world, and you've got preaching to Muslims, spending time with Reform Muslims, women, children, underprivileged, what were considered low-class peoples and communities, reaching out to them, rehabilitating them. And on the other hand, you have Nityananda as Krishna, which means as Balaram, which means as Krishna's counterform, which means as Krishna's right hand, which means as Krishna's merciful nature, which means as the creator of the universe who walked this world to perform a miracle and uplift society. And Nityananda is who is represented by our gurus, because they represent the outreach arm of Krishna, Krishna's mercy, Krishna's kindness, and Nityananda is actually an incarnation of Krishna's kindness, even vis-a-vis Mahaprabhu. So Mahaprabhu himself is the Karuna avatar, the avatar of mercy, but then Nityananda is like the Kripa avatar of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It's like even more. So either A, he's an equal shareholder, or B, he becomes the more merciful person. The classic example of this is Jagai and Madhai. So that's Madhai on the ground. He beat Nityananda. Nityananda's bleeding. Mahaprabhu turns into Krishna, breaks out the Sudarshan chakra, and is ready to kill the demon. And Nityananda says, no. He's good. He's good. He was going to hurt me worse, and then his brother told him not to hurt me worse. So they did me a great service. Whatever piety I've ever done, you please give it to them. If you love me, then you'll love them. If you kill them, then everybody has to be killed. And so that Christ-like figure, that impossible, uncommon, unfathomable kindness and mercy that is so attractive that it changed the hearts of 3 billion people, practically speaking half the world's population in Christianity. Just the incalculableness of mercy. And Mahaprabhu is normally that to anybody else on the planet, but Nityananda Prabhu is even that to Mahaprabhu. a person whom someone more merciful cannot be conceived. All the beauty of Jesus without the weird, macabre, cannibalistic torture element that unfortunately became inexorably linked to their tradition. If you get these two things about Nityananda Prabhu, then you understood him. And then what I thought we would do, just to finish off, we would just look at a song written by Narottam Das Thakur 4.5 centuries ago about Nityananda Prabhu. And you get a sense of how our tradition viewed him, even, relatively soon after the formation of our movement. Nitai Pada Kamala, Koti Chanja Shushitala. Nitai's feet are like moonbeams, more Jai Chai Jagata Judai. Nityananda's feet are more cooling than millions of moons. Shitala means cooling. Shushitala means extremely cooling. Koti Chandra, like millions of moons. Nitai Padakamala, his lotus feet are like more cooling than millions of moons. Jai Chai Jagat Judai. And the moonbeams emanating from them, the shade emanating from them, the moonbeams emanating from them, relieves the universe of its burning and suffering in the hot sun of material existence. Just like if you've labored in the sun, which gives light but also gives so much heat and is really saps your strength. We don't generally feel the sun in the U.S. the way it's felt in India. If you go to India and the sun is out and you're out in the sun, it saps your strength. You know what I'm talking about? It's totally different. You can't really sunbathe in India. It's like maybe in the morning time you can go out for a couple of hours, but the sun, even in the wintertime, becomes so fierce. I don't know what it is about, maybe the atmosphere or something like that, but it's just so intense. And then after that, but the sun's out, it gives you light. But then if the moon comes out, it gives you all the light of the sun. You can totally see in a full moon night. But the light doesn't sap your strength. It invigorates you, gives you strength. There's a whole Ayurvedic thing, how the moon is what gives rus to vegetables. It gives life to vegetables. And so that imagery is being invoked here. Nityananda's lotus feet, they're not gonna. Maybe Krishna's like the sun. Krishna Surya Sama. Krishna's like the sun. But Nityananda's like the moon. Of course, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was also likened to the moon. But the amazing thing is that Nityananda, even in comparison to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, gets likened to the moon. He's like the moon of the moon. Heno Nitai Bine Bhai Radha Krishna Paite Nai. Without Nityananda, my brother, brothers, without Nityananda, you cannot achieve Radha Krishna. Heno Nitai Bine Bhai. Brothers, without Nityananda Prabhu, Radha Krishna Paite Nai. Radha and Krishna cannot be attained. That's like the heaviest statement you could ever imagine. The goal of the Hare Krishna movement is to get to Radha Krishna. You can't get to Radha Krishna without Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy, and you can't get Mahaprabhu's mercy without Nityananda's mercy. Therefore, through transitive logic, you can't get to Radha Krishna except through Nityananda's mercy. He's this essential feature, this essential avatar, this essential manifestation of Krishna, whose purpose is to get you ready for Radha and Krishna's service. We can skip to another song. Ar kabe nitya chan koruna hoibe. So, and when Nityananda will become merciful to you, then samsara vasana mora kabe tucha habe. And when Nityananda will be merciful to you, and that's when your material desires will become insignificant. Samsara more vasana, the etchings in your consciousness, the material inclinations that are deeply rooted in your heart, those will become minuscule. They'll no longer stop you. When? When Nityananda is merciful to you. And so, how is it that you can't get to Radha and Krishna without Nityananda Prabhu? Because Nityananda Prabhu will purify you and remove the obstacles that block you from being able to love Radha and Krishna. And devotees pray to Lord Nityananda like this. And how long have they been doing that? Since he was on the planet. He performed this feature. The Chaitanya Charitamrita was written because Nityananda Prabhu blessed Krishnadas Kaviraj to have a vision of Radha and Krishna by Nityananda Prabhu's mercy. He credits it. Our movement was built on the mercy that Nityananda dispensed that then allowed people to have ecstatic revelations about Radha and Krishna. And in many ways, ecstatic revelations about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was Radha and Krishna combined. And some of that came from the Goswamis and their writings and Swarup Damodar and their very, very beautiful, powerful, revelatory texts. I'm going to say something important now. Part of what has to happen is we have to encounter the writings of our tradition. And in the writings of our tradition, Nityananda does not write our tradition. You find these incredible expositions on who Radha and Krishna are, who Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is, and these explanations and these expositions and these explorations are so beautiful. They're bewitchingly beautiful, and they are the most prized possession of our tradition, and they become a bridge through which you see Krishna. They're a literary bridge that delivers you to Krishna and gives you an ecstatic vision of Krishna. They're the prime inspiration behind our meditational tradition. But that stuff won't take hold in your heart because our hearts are meager and we're overwhelmed by material desires. And so Nityananda comes in and he's so merciful, he embraces you. And by embracing you, he purifies you because he's prophylactic. He purifies you by his touch. And you're restored. And in that purified state, you can then understand our tradition. So there's two things that happen. We have to study the books of the Goswamis, we have to study our tradition, we have to meditate on Radha and Krishna's pastimes, but you have to do so with a purified mind. And Nityananda plays this critical role in the life of a devotee, according to our tradition, where he dissipates your darkness. He illuminates you. He embraces you. He purifies you. He brings you back to life. He rejuvenates you. He fills you with rasa like the moon fills you with rasa. And then you can look at our tradition and you realize, and you just use this beauty abounds in every direction. That's why we say without Nityananda's mercy you can't get Radha and Krishna. Actually, you find this, it's actually stated directly in the song I'm referring to here. The next line, so Arkabe nita chan kuruna hoibe samsara vasana moda kabatucha habe. That, and when Nityananda is merciful, then, and when Nityananda becomes merciful, then at that time your material desires will become insignificant. And then vishaya chadiya kabe shude habe man. Then having given up materialism, your mind has become purified. And then kabe hama hedava Shri Vrindavan. And then at that time, you'll be able to understand Vrindavan, Rupa Raghunatha Pade, Hoibe Akuti. And then you'll become eager to understand Rupa and Raghunath's writings. Kabe Hama Bujhabo Shejuga Lapriti. And then you will be able to understand the intimate love of Radha and Krishna. So this thing I just mentioned is actually written 4.5 centuries ago. You get Nityananda's mercy, it takes away your material desires, but it takes it away in such a way that you now become primed for and ready for our revelatory tradition, which then can take hold in your heart because that ground's become fertile. And the same author. So, Jai Chai Jagata Judai, Shesham Banda, Heno Nitai Bine Bhai Radha Krishna Pai Tena, Drida Kodi Dhado Nitayar Pai. Drida Kodi Dhado Nitayar Pai. We need to hold on to Nityananda. We need to hold on to his lotus feet very strongly. Why? Because those lotus feet are cooling. Why? Because the moonbeams emanating from them will relieve you of all your distress. So you've got to hold on to that. Make that connection with Nityananda and never give it up. Drida Kodi Dodo. You've got to really strongly hold on. Nitayar Pai. To Nitai's feet. Shesham Mandana Hiyar Brita Jamma Gelotar. Without a connection to Nityananda, your life is useless. She Pashu Bodo Judachar. You become no more than a badly behaved animal. Nitai Nabolilo Muke. Without speaking Nityananda's name in your mouth, Majilo Samsara Suke. You're just absorbed in the happiness of your suffering. Samsara Suke. You're just Majilo. You're absorbed in the happiness of your own suffering. Vidyakule Kikodi Betar. How will you be protected? How will you be delivered? By learning and high birth, and all these things are meaningless. This again is this caste critique. What do you care about your family heritage, your parentage, your learning, your education? Those things aren't going to deliver you from your karma, from your suffering. Don't just be like an animal who spends his life. And what makes you an animal? Nitai na bolilo muke. If you don't chant Nityananda's name, then you're no better than an animal. She pashu bodo dudacha. You're a very badly behaved animal. Animals by their nature are poorly behaved, but you're an animal, and you're within the animal class. You are a badly behaved animal. If such a thing could possibly exist. It's like a heavy criticism. Ahankar matahoya nitaipad pashariya. You become maddened by your ego and you forgot Nityananda. It's almost like you forgot Krishna. You get it? But it's this first step in remembering Krishna. You remember Nitai, you remember Guru, you remember Nitai, then you become purified, and then the remembrance of Krishna comes. But you can speak about Nityananda as a Vaishnava, you can speak about him as Krishna, and we just bounce back and forth, and that's our tradition. And the resolution is that he was an incarnation who appeared in this world to uplift us by playing the role of a Vaishnava in a great miracle. The same way for Christians, God descended as Jesus and uplifted the world by entering within history in a miraculous manifestation. Whereas they have we do it a little different than them. They have what's called the hypostatic union, where God was fully man and fully divine simultaneously, which I think is philosophically unworkable. We rather have a different revelation. We say that he was the Lord, but by his omnipotence he gave you divine eyes so you could see him. And we don't say he was fully man, fully divine, which I believe is subject to the law of contradiction in a way that our tradition is not, which also believes in avatars, but those avatars retain their spiritual form. Therefore, literally the God of heaven came into this world and walked among men in a form that you could see by giving you divine eyes, and an omnipotent being could surely do that, and the omnibenevolent one would want to do that. Ahankar matta hoya nitai pada pashariya satya kodi mani asatyere satya kodi mani. You now consider those things to be important that are actually not important. Your youth, your beauty, your strength, your learning, your wealth, your prestige. We think these things are important. We take care of our lives, but those things are not important. They'll just be gone like that. You become maddened. You forgot. Look what's right in front of you. Krishna consciousness is right in front of you. Nityananda, even today, is in this world in the form of the great Vaishnava savants who manifest his mercy even today, who are otherworldly in their compassion, otherworldly in their realization. They're here even now. But you're maddened by your ego. You don't appreciate it. And so you're just running after insignificant things, thinking that's the real wealth. Such a Kodimai. Nitya Karuna Hobe, Braje Radha Krishna Pabe. If Nityananda becomes merciful to you, then you will get Radha and Krishna. Nitya Karuna Hobe, Braje Radha Krishna Pabe. If Nityananda becomes merciful to you, at that time you will get Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan. Same line as the other song. How important he was to our early poets. No one gets written about like this. No one gets written about like this. Even Mahaprabhu doesn't quite get written about like this. Being one step removed from Mahaprabhu. It's like Mahaprabhu is Radha and Krishna in many ways. And so by attaining Mahaprabhu, you also attain Radha and Krishna, really, in many ways, for much of our theology. But Nityananda is removed enough. He's just one step off. And that allows him to become that necessary bridge that you go through. And so although this is there about Mahaprabhu, it's not there in the same way. Because Mahaprabhu himself is the goal, whereas Nityananda becomes the way to the goal. Dhado Nityacharan Dukani. Grab a hold of those two lotus feet, of his pair of lotus feet. Grab a hold of them now. It's like the purport to every verse. The same thing again. Grab his lotus feet, get his lotus feet. He says it over and over again. So, Dhado Nitya Charana Dukani. Grab the pair of his lotus feet. Then the previous line, it says, I guess it's 2 lines up. All right, I was wrong. Dhado Nitai Pai. So it's 2 lines. 2 lines, not 3. And then the last section, which I think is the most beautiful and meditational. Nitya Charana Satya Ta Shebaka Nitya. Nitai's feet are real. And his followers are liberated. This isn't just, in some ways, at a certain point, the poet just puts all his cards on the table. This is a real thing. You accepted something that wasn't real as being real, and you're going to suffer because of it. But Nityananda's feet, they're not fake. I'm not trying to fake you out. I'm not trying to con you. Eventually, the author just puts all his cards on the table. This is a real thing. You cry out to Nityananda, you cry out his name, and you become his follower, and you'll be liberated. It's a real thing. Nitya Charana Satya. His feet are real. Ta Shebaka Nitya. And his followers become liberated. At some point, you're allowed to put your cards on the table, and you're not asking people for blind faith. You've made your argument sufficiently, and you can make an impassioned appeal, and that's what the author is doing now. Sadakodo Asha. You should always desire those lotus feet. This should be your only desire. Bodo Duki Nitai. Mode Kodo Suki. I'm Naratam Bodo Duki. Naratam is so unhappy. Naratam Bodo Duki. I'm so unhappy. And then Mode Kodo Suki. You, like I'm begging you, make me happy. You make me happy. I want to be happy through you, with you, in your service. I don't want to get happy from the material world anymore. I'm done leaving you. I'm going to hold on to you, but I'm suffering, and I need your mercy. Make me happy. And then Raka Ranga, what is it? Rako Ranga Pasha. Charana, Rako Ranga Charaner Pasha. Thank you, Prabhu. Rako Ranga Charaner Pasha. You please keep me close to your reddish lotus feet. You please protect me by your reddish lotus feet. It's kind of a poetic, reddish lotus feet. And you hold me close to them. Keep me close. So the whole song is still this idea that, look, Nityananda's feet, his service, his mission, praying to him, crying out to him is going to help you. And I guess we'll finish at this point. We say, if you chant Hare Krishna, you can chant Hare Krishna. What is it? Bahu Janma Kodi Yodi Shabana Kirtan Tabutana Pai Krishna Pade Premadan. You can chant Krishna's name for many lifetimes. And you cannot get love of God. You cannot get liberated. But if you chant Gauranatai, if you chant Nityananda's name with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that combo, if you chant Gauranathai's name, those two names together, that package, then it doesn't matter who you are or what you've done, you'll become purified, you'll become liberated, and then you'll be able to chant Hare Krishna, and then you'll be able to see Radha Krishna. So even within our kirtan style, we do that, the Gaudiya, we do the Chaitanya stuff in the beginning of our kirtan to purify us so we can chant Hare Krishna. Every single time we lead kirtan, we do some glorification of Nityananda, of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on the front end. And then we do kirtan. And that's designed to purify you so you can appreciate Radha and Krishna's ecstatic savant pastimes. So, wrapping it all up, if you really want to become a Hare Krishna, you have to understand a couple of things. And I'd say the two things you have to understand are Radha and Krishna and Gauranatai. And Radha and Krishna is, in essence, a romantic relationship with the divine. That's what that is. And Gauranatai is how that romantic relationship with the divine becomes a possibility for your average person walking down the street. And Nityananda is a key part of that package. Most Gaudiya temples are just Mahaprabhu or Gaur Gadadhar. Gauranatai was Prabhupada's thing. Who is Nityananda? He's this Vaishnava / avatar who made the Hare Krishna movement available to everybody under the sun, who totally reformed society, who made it respectable to be a Vaishnava, who took Shudras and made them into Brahmanas in Bengal, enough that took notice of the British government during the Raj when they were located in Calcutta. They studied it, wrote about it. It's why the Hare Krishna movement exists. It's because Prabhupada's love was so great for Nityananda that he even brought Nityananda to the western shores and established Gauranatai deities in all of his temples. And Nityananda is this bridge, more merciful than Mahaprabhu, who himself is a Karuna avatar. Nityananda becomes the Kripa avatar of the Karuna avatar, the incarnation of mercy of the incarnation of mercy. One step removed, and therefore you can cross through him to get to Radha and Krishna. But for us, we're not ungrateful, and so when we hold on to Nityananda's lotus feet and see Radha Krishna, we don't give them up. We just hold on to them forever. And he becomes an eternal feature of our spiritual life. We don't just use him and then give him up once we've gotten where we want to go. We hold on to him forever in great gratitude. And he's been spoken about in the songs and by the poets of our tradition. He's behind the Chaitanya Bhagavad. He's behind the Chaitanya Charitamrita. He's behind so many of our core texts, so much of our theology. He's this secret ace up our sleeve for how we get Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's attention, for how we get Mahaprabhu's blessing, for how we get to Radha and Krishna. No one in our tradition is spoken of like this. He's unique. As a Vaishnava, okay, the other Vaishnavas are there, Advaita, Gadadhar, sure, no problem. As Krishna, sure, Mahaprabhu was there. But this feature that you embrace him, and he embraces you, and he blesses you, and then your desires go away, your material desires, and then you become ripe to be able to understand the esoterica of our tradition. That's something unique to Nityananda Prabhu. I tried my best to highlight today. Forgive me if it wasn't like... I feel like I'm not quite doing a good enough job to communicate it. But thank you very much. Let's do a little kirtan. Hare Krishna.